On behalf of our audience, I would like to invite our today's guest who join me now to our studio. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Would you please tell us a bit about yourself, just as introduction?
Thank you again. My name is Birhanu Lenjiso.
Yeah.
I usually comment on socio-political issues. I identify myself as sociologist.
All right. Thank you very much. Welcome. As we have been in a discussion, Ethiopia is a country of many nations, nationalities, rich in histories, diversity, languages, religion, so on and so forth. Yet the question is, where are we now? That is the theme and the process that has been gone through. So we'll start with the definition of narrative first. What is narrative for you, and how it was being practiced in our country?
Yes, as you rightly said, Ethiopia is a multinational country. Ethiopia is one of those countries who have these multiple identities and, a mosaic of cultures and religion, But we have issues even in understanding this nature of Ethiopia, especially if you look at it from the political perspective. There is a group who still claim Ethiopia is one nation, and these differences we are talking about is subnational differences, and they advocate to ignore or if possible to even erase or assimilate these differences to make Ethiopia a one nation, one language, one culture country. And this has been there for quite a long time. Governmental policies have been pushing for that, but at least right now we accept the fact that Ethiopia is a multinational country, a multicultural country with with different layers of identities. When that is taken into consideration, then each nation or every nation in this country has its own history, its own culture, language, and its own narrative. So then comes a need to have this shared narrative at the country level. But this has never been an agenda before. For one thing, because we have never acknowledged the fact that Ethiopia is a diverse country. We have never give that recognition to nations and nationalities in this country. And it is a major question that toppled at least two regimes in this country. Over the last 13 years, although we acknowledged the fact that Ethiopia is a multinational country, we never engaged in a political process that helped us to forge this shared narrative. Over the last 5 years, it is an agenda, a very, very critical agenda. There was an engagement to create awareness on the need of narrative itself. And with regard to the meaning, you asked, narrative is simply a story. It is a story that we tell about something. So everything has a story, in fact. Even individuals have a story. It is our story that makes us who we are. Me as Birhanu, I have a story. For example, when you start your introduction, you asked me to tell you a little bit about myself, and that is my story, that is my narrative. So narrative as such is a very critical story that gives us meaning, that makes us who we are. So when we are talking about a national narrative or a shared narrative at country level, for example, a grand narrative for Ethiopia, it is a story about Ethiopia that describes what Ethiopia really is, what makes Ethiopia unique, what Ethiopians share, and what symbols identify Ethiopia as a country at a global level. And a story that everybody, regardless of their national and political difference, share at the country level. It's a very critical thing. It's a very important thing.
Yeah.
It's a story that gives a meaning to the country, or it is like a software of being a nation together.
Yeah.
So we are in a process of forging this kind of story now.
Thank you very much for your insight. How did country like USA build their narrative? Let us start with that one.
Of course, at different times, the process that countries or political forces follow to craft a narrative may differ. US is, for example, a very diverse country. You see all sorts of diversity in the United States. On one hand, they actually acknowledge the fact that US is a land of immigrant, a land of opportunity, that anybody can go there. So they kind of equate the United States with the globe itself. That tells you that US is actually a very diverse country. But on the other side, they also claim that they are melting pot. Once you go in, you melt into what is known as the United States. So that is their narrative. And the US narrative is not really identity-focused narrative. It is a narrative of greatness. Yeah, it is. It very much emphasizes their heroism, that no country will come in and defeat them, and they have used the Hollywood to sell that kind of narrative, and it's very, very popular actually.
Yeah.
But if you go to countries who emphasize identity, for example, countries who acknowledge their diversity, they appreciate, they present their diversity as beauty, but they also at the same time have this very limited but shared kind of narrative. If you take countries like India, Nigeria, these two things, the common narrative and the diversity narrative, go hand in hand. This happened to be a problem in Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, there are, I think, when it comes to diversity and crafting this common narrative, I think there are two, as far as I'm concerned, two things, are very, very magnified. The first one is our disagreement or dispute on past history. If you look at our history, for one thing, we don't have history documented in a way that it represents everybody. The history of Ethiopia is a history of rulers, and the rulers who come from certain background is not well, their legitimacy is not accepted well across the country. So we don't have a common understanding of our history. That is one problem. The other thing is we never agreed on the identity of Ethiopia itself.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, some still claim Ethiopia is a nation, and the group that we are describing as nations and nationalities in constitution today are subnational groups, which I think doesn't go really with the dictionary definition of what it means to be a nation. So every nation and nationalities in Ethiopia actually has a very good story to tell. It is a very fascinating story of resilience, a fascinating story of civilization. The only problem at a national level or at a country level is to have a system in place that acknowledge all these differences with their very nice story, and then based on that, crafting a common, a shared narrative that again everybody else will share. Otherwise, there is a very good lesson from elsewhere. There is also a very good lesson from our own experience itself. For example, the imperial era actually tried to assimilate nations in this country by adopting one language and one culture. It failed terribly.
Yeah.
The Derg, who in principle said, I will acknowledge the questions of nationalities, but I'm not going to answer them like I did for the land, for the tiller question, also faced the same problem. That same question actually took a number of guerrilla fighters to the bush, who happened to be liberation fighters, and they managed to topple the Derg regime. Putting the structure in place is a very good step, but the EPDRF also failed to craft that common narrative or shared narrative that will glue the diverse groups in this country. That is why every nations and nationalities continue to focus on their own narrative, national
traditional
narrative, rather than focusing on having common things in place. So, as I said earlier, it is good to recognize and to appreciate these differences, these stories that every nationalities have, but it is equally important to craft that common narrative to have a strong common country.
Yeah. In comparison to USA or other countries, why do Ethiopia just focus on the narrative of those rulers? How was the history written? You have mentioned it nicely. And why do other people consider themselves as being left behind?
Yeah, so there are two issues. One group, as I said earlier, is very nostalgic about the past.
Yeah.
So in their political statement or their political mission is actually to bring that very good, nice past back. And the other group is group who identifies themselves with historical victimhood. They say, which is true actually, the way the Ethiopian state was created, or the process of the Ethiopian state formation, was full of injustice. Basically, the political elite from the northern part of the country has expanded to the southern part of the country, and this is to grab their land and to take labor. So it is a kind of, they followed an economic container model, and there were a lot of injustice, and they have never been redressed for that. There is no historical political process that acknowledge that kind of injustice and redress this group. That put the Ethiopian state in the legitimacy dilemma. And that means, since it has followed this, it is a coercive kind of process, and many groups lost their identity, lost their land, lost their relatives, and there should have been a political process in place that acknowledge those historical injustice and redress them. That has never happened.
Yeah.
Because of that, certain groups, especially the nation and nationalities in the southern part of the country, still have that wound. They claim they have never been integrated into the Ethiopian state. Of course, the 1995 constitution, although the certain processes are missed out, if we look at experiences from elsewhere like South Africa, there should have been a political process that, for example, truth and reconciliation, things like that.
Yeah.
But the constitution, at least in principle, say Ethiopian nations and nationalities have a question, a legitimate question,
Right.
and they should be acknowledged, they should be represented, should have a self-determination, or at least they have to have that right of self-rule, at least in principle.
Yeah.
Those are all good. It happened, they are relatively okay, but without shared narrative again, we cannot have that common thing that we all identify ourselves with. We cannot tell the same story as a citizen of one country. So the structure is good. It is good to have the structure in place. The structure alone is not enough. And if you look at the historical journey, especially the governance oscillations that we passed through, starting from the imperial era, we started that unitary assimilationist policy, then we come the Marxist-Leninist, then we come to EPDRF federalism. There is a serious change of governance structure, but there is always issues like conflict, displacement, disagreement. Why? Because we don't have a common narrative.
Yeah.
Although we changed the governance system, we have never crafted a shared narrative that glue us together. So that brings us to a chapter where we now say narrative is a very, very critical element for countries like Ethiopia, diverse countries like Ethiopia, to have a common future, to have a common dream, to focus on our common peace, stability, and development. We need to have that thing crafted.
Let's come to the national dialogue. How did countries like South Africa, Tunisia, and Rwanda succeeded in national dialogue?
I think national dialogue is a political process that will help us to overcome these broad historical issues and to close, past chapters and to aspire a common future. In diverse countries like our own, I think it's a very critical political process, and it's long overdue, I guess. Yes, there are countries where national dialogue failed, but there are also countries who have used this political process to overcome their challenges. The best example, I think, is Tunisia. And this is not long ago, I think over the last 20 years, right?
Yeah.
Over the last 25 years, I think a couple of 20 or 25 national dialogue happened in all over the world, and many have succeeded to some extent. There are also national dialogues that failed. This process has never been tried in Ethiopia, and we are trying it for the first time. But the success of national dialogue very much depends on our consciousness. Because national dialogue does not really offer you a magical bullet. It offers you a platform.
Yeah.
It offers you a table where you sit down and discuss your problem in a very sober way. And also to have that process succeed, you need to have a culture, a dialogue culture, which we unfortunately lack. When our elite come to the table, if they happen to come to the table, our elite actually run away from the table. They go to the bush. We have a lot of elite in the bush even right now. So we don't have that culture. People, if they happen to be on a table to discuss with a group that they think antagonizes their position, they come, their ears locked, their mouths open. That means to talk, not to listen. Without listening behavior, without listening culture, the success of national dialogue is very much in question mark. But Ethiopia is at a critical juncture now. And if any elite has a conscious mind to look at where we are, I think the national dialogue is a blessing for us. We have to sit down. Of course, before we sit down, we have to come with that deliberate decision to agree. We need to agree on certain things to have this country moving forward. So if the elite are conscious, if the public is conscious in general, if the public is conscious, you are lucky they will pressure the elite to come to the table. But right now in our country, the elites are, very much mono, solo. They say the country is my platform. Everybody should listen to what I say. If they don't listen to what I say, my way is the highway. It's a very common kind of approach. But I also see, people coming to look at the reality on the ground and our future without having this kind of political process. And the commissioners are really struggling to prove themselves that they are truly into this
process.
And everywhere I go, I actually make this call that every citizen in this country has to deliberately pay attention to this political process, and we have to have our past sorted out and closed. We have to learn from our history and close that chapter once and for all, and embark on our future. Because the past is not in our control. The future is very much in our control. And we have to actually create a better Ethiopia for our kids.
Yeah, even what some scholars argue is that we left our indigenous norms, values, knowledge, skills, and even the living standards or the system that glue us together. For instance, we can take Gada system. As in the Gada system, we do have an umbrella of conflict resolution mechanism.
Yeah.
When we left that one, and even as you have mentioned, the past narrative has forced that system to weaken, that I think lead us to this.
Nations and nationalities in Ethiopia have this very good civilization, like Gada itself, for example, which it is a very beautiful governance system. And in Gada you find consensus building. Consensus building is a very, very critical pillar of, and dialogue is a symbol that the Oromo society is known for. But if you take, even if you take Oromo Illi today, I don't think we have that patience to sit down and discuss among ourselves, let alone talking to other groups. So there are good values that probably we need to look back on, like Gada, for example. And there are also efforts in place, for example, in Oromia to bring certain values, to revive certain Oromo values. And this also happened elsewhere. For example, during the French Revolution, the French elite had to look back on their tradition to resolve their issues. So looking back on Gada, for example, is a very good approach for Oromo elite to sit down, to discuss, to ash out their problems that actually emanates from how we look at certain things. So yes, certain values were weakened by the state formation, but today it is in our hand to revive them.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think there is any force that block you from doing that.
Yeah.
But are we doing it today? Yesterday we were blaming somebody for erasing it, but today who are we going to blame? So if you start to take that blame to yourself, then I think that is a very good starting point for us to sit down and discuss our issue, to focus on idea, to let the winning ideas come forward and lead all of us. I think that consciousness is a very critical thing for all of us, for Oromo elite as well as Ethiopian elite, to overcome our challenges.
Last but not least, what Ethiopians lesson that can draw from another successful countries and your recommendation?
We have actually a lot to learn from elsewhere. As I said, we can learn a lot from Tunisia, we can learn from South Africa, even Kenya,
Yeah.
a few years back. Senegal, for example, how they engaged the diaspora, Colombia, Ireland. There are many countries who have gone through this process and built a strong country. But for Ethiopia, I think looking inward is also very important. If you look on our own tradition, as you just mentioned, for example, looking at the Gada tradition, how the Oromo society used to have that long consensus building, conflict resolution processes. But in general, we need to agree on who we are. Ethiopia is a very diverse country, and every culture serves a purpose. There is no culture to ignore in this country. There is no nation that we can undermine. We have to respect each other. Tolerance emanates from respecting each other. Once we acknowledge, respect, and agree to live, coexist in this country by tolerating each other, by appreciating our diversity, that will bring us to a table where we sit down and craft that common narrative. And to craft that common narrative, grand narrative, then we can take experiences from countries I just mentioned, including Tunisia, where the national dialogue actually managed to craft a national identity with a shared narrative. And I mean, there is a huge lesson, and if Ethiopians are ready and willing to learn and to apply to their own country, there is no shortage of experience. We only need to have that liberated mind that is willing to learn from each other and to let the idea, to let the winning idea to lead us forward. I think the future is not dark for Ethiopia.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for your insightful analysis, recommendation, as well as the way forward for our audience. Our audience, that's all we have for you today. Bye-bye.